My name is Catalina Mena, and as a part of a project at my high school, I made this podcast to spread awareness about struggles immigrants face. Even though the U.S. was built by immigrants, they still face harsh stereotypes and bias. This is the story of 3 immigrants living in Massachusetts. They are neighbors, workers, and most importantly, humans. What was life like in your home country?
From El Salvador. I have been in the United States for the last almost 25 years now. I came in 1998. And when I hear the question, I traveled back to when I was born, 1976, in a countryside. The place was called San Agustin, Usulutan. This place is in El Salvador. My both parents were farmers during that time. That was the time that everyone in El Salvador was getting into kind of like what I have learned was the beginning of what eventually was well known, the 12-year Civil War. So in 1979, my parents were forced to leave the place where they were living, and they pretty much have the option only to take their kids. And that was it. So they lost everything. They moved from the countryside to the city and to start kind of like a new life. So when I think about how was life like growing up, it was more like a survival mode. If we have food for today and tomorrow, we are happy. If we have place where we can sleep under a roof, we are happy. That lifestyle. I remember my parents, both of them didn't know how to read and write, but they knew going to school, learning how to read and write was the best way moving forward, and they were always dreaming about their kids going to school. I started going to school in Usulutan. I remember that first year of going to classes, sometimes I will go without shoes, and people will be laughing at me because not having shoes, and like in our case, we were just like finding a ways how to survive. So that was kind of like growing up. Eventually, I joined the workforce when I was like 9, 10 years old. I started working and supporting my parents, and also I think I learned their message about going to school. So I was working during the day and going to school at evening. And eventually I grew up with that idea, like I hope one day I will be able to go to college. So time came by. I was 21 years old with dreaming about going to school and dreaming about opportunities where I can eventually have a different life than my parents. So I was faced with the reality that I wanted to achieve higher education, but the money was not there. And then by that moment, I had 3 sisters hoping to achieve the same dream. If the dream is not available for me right now, most likely my sisters won't have the opportunity too. That was one of the decisions that motivated me to take the risk of moving from El Salvador to the United States. It sounds easy, but I will tell you how was the trip. But yeah, life was rough, but I think it was a training for what comes after, which is the life I am living nowadays.
I grew up in the middle of the war. After the war in my country, the entire country struggles with a lot of violence. Nevertheless, I finished my high school and I also have my bachelor's degree. I also have a daughter in El Salvador. And we left the country because I received an opportunity to work for the government of El Salvador as a diplomat at the consulate. It was a complicated decision because I have all my family and friends were there, and moving to another country is like I started again from the beginning, so it was very complicated.
Life in El Salvador was stable, comfortable, and surrounded with support from family and friends, and the stability of living in the neighborhood where I grew up. were the people and places that were familiar to me when I was growing up. So, having my own family, my then wife, and my 1 month old daughter was a piece of heaven and a profession that was fulfilling. So, life in El Salvador was, I would say, fulfilling and stable.
What hopes did you have when you came to the US?
I mean, I was coming with the dream of spending 2 years in the United States, hoping that I was going to save enough money to buy a house in El Salvador, hoping that I was going to save enough money to maybe put small business in El Salvador and go back. But that was not the reality. And in my head, the opportunity to higher education was also there. And it was one of the motivation that when I came to the United States, I was like, yes, I want to save. Yes, I would like to go back. But eventually, when I insert myself into the United States lifestyle and the economy and everything, I was never able to save and I was not able to go back to El Salvador. But the opportunity to continue learning started since day one when I arrived to the United States. Especially, I came directly to Somerville, Massachusetts. And one of the first questions I asked to my cousins was, where can I go to take some English classes? Because I got some really bad experiences with a few people I encountered when I was coming, even just from the trip between Tucson, Arizona, and Massachusetts. There were a few experiences that I was like, I need to learn English. And since day one, I went to ask for where can I take classes, and eventually the dream of like the my parents' dream for me and also my dream were together with the idea that if I learn English, maybe eventually I can take some college classes. And all that was kind of like a motivation that also eventually. So when I arrived a few years later in Massachusetts, I was able to one start making enough money to pay my bills here to support my family in El Salvador and my sisters at the same time that I was taking some classes and eventually joined to take some college classes. It took me 9 years to finish an associate degree that any student with all the support in Massachusetts will do it in 2 years. It took me nine, but it was one of those dreams that motivate me to come to the US, and it motivate me every day to do things differently since I came here. So that's one of the hopes I had when I left El Salvador, and it was one of those things that motivate me to work hard here in the US. I had a lot of hopes, and I also have fulfilled some of those. I still working hard to get some more done.
Well, the hope that I had when I came was to serve the people of my country and serve other immigrants that were not as lucky as I was, came by the border without inspection, or they got arrested, or they got a notice to appear in a court. So I wanted to help them with all the services that we could provide at the consulate. And my other goal, like a more personal goal, was to speak fluent English and also allow that we have the opportunity that my daughter study in this country.
My hopes coming to the US were the ones of somebody who had to leave in a hurry. I knew that I didn't have all the arrangements done ahead of time, but I knew that I was and my family were also coming to a safe place, a place where we were um, expected and about to be supported. My then wife is a U.S. citizen from Vermont, so it was very, the landing was full of support and known faces to my wife And with the presence of our newborn daughter, coming to the US, landing in the US was a happy and joyful time for my wife's family. And the expectations were the ones of an immigrant, being able to work and thrive in a new place. It was a challenge, but I knew I was not the first one confronting that challenge, and I knew that with all the support around, especially being documented and fully bilingual, I thought this is a place where I can thrive and support for my family.
When you arrived, did you face any struggles?
Absolutely. So what the first struggle was I didn't speak English. So even to call a company, I needed somebody else to set up any kind of like account or things like that. But one of the stories I can share, for example, it was that my first job was going to work in a factory in Malden. And every Friday that we were getting a check, we would run to a bank in Malden to get the check cash. So one of the things that many people were doing during that time, it was that they were always trying to go to the teller that speaks Spanish. And in the bank, there was only one person that speaks Spanish. So the majority of people from that were working together in this factory will go to this line. So the first a few times I have to go catch my check, I was like, why is everybody in this line when there are some other lines that are more empty? And people say, if they ask you something and you don't understand, you will have issues. So that's why everyone preferred to go here. So just the language is a big barrier because, this is like a clear example. And they were like four tellers waiting for customers to come, but everyone will go to the Spanish speaker. So English was one of the big barriers. The other one, I think also it was the coming undocumented with a immigration procedure. Since day one, I was facing deportation. That was a big issue. And other stories, I love to share stories, is that when I was taking ESL classes, somebody from Bunker Hill Community College came to do a presentation saying like, hey, Bunker Hill Community College is motivating people to take some college classes. We are actually offering 2 free classes for everyone who would like to come. And you are here taking ESL classes. You just have to come to the college, take the ESL placement, and if you make it, you can take the free classes. I was like, wow, that's a great idea. I'm going to do it. Here I come. I went to the college. I registered. I took the placement test and I made it. But then when I was looking forward to register for the free classes and some other classes that I was planning to take, they said, do you have a social security? And I was like, no. Okay, so if you don't have social security, how are you going to pay for it? And then I was faced with that reality. I didn't have a social security. I didn't have money to pay, so I have to put my dream away. And that kind of like set me back a little bit from achieving my dream, and my motivation during that time was kind of like hitting low because of that reality. So not having documentation is so difficult for people that comes with so many dreams, but then you realize like, if I don't have a social security, how will I be able to do things, how to achieve my dreams? So, that's that. And then all the reality that in my case, it was my first time leaving my family in El Salvador, leaving my country. It was my first time to being away in another country with different culture, not knowing people, just my 5 cousins that were here during that time. And then I didn't know anyone else. So all that bring extra stress, and then you're missing your family, you're missing your parents. My father actually died 9 months after I came to the United States. So, all that kind of create pain and difficulty at the beginning of coming here. So in my case, it was very hard, very rough start. And, I still continue missing my country. I have been in the U.S. for 25 years with only being allowed to travel to my country only twice because of my immigration status. But 25 years later, I'm still here. I'm still motivated to continue achieving my dreams. But for sure, the struggle when arriving is not easy.
Many struggles. One of them was the language. We also have to learn how the system works. All of was new information for us. We didn't know how was the process to rent an apartment, to open a bank account, to get a driver's license, to go to the doctor. Everything was all of it was a nightmare. We never got to have the entire information about any process. There was always something that we missed until we learned that we have to understand the new system that we're living in.
Struggles, yes, I had some. The first of them coming in May, actually in March, was the end of the winter months and the cold and the difficulty moving around because transportation, I didn't have that all set. And also clothing, what I had known up until then was not necessarily the appropriate clothing. I also came unemployed, so it was in a matter of maybe 3 months that I landed my first job, which was a source of stability and also a fulfillment of the desire of an immigrant, which is to be able to get employed and doing something that was within my range of abilities. I was an educator in El Salvador, and I could end up in Vermont, in rural Vermont, with a teaching position teaching Spanish, which, although was not something I was doing in El Salvador, it was the teaching profession as such was something that I had some experience with. So it was something very rewarding. And as I said, months into my arrival, I was able to feel that, yes, I landed into a new country and I am standing in my 2 feet. It was a very nice feeling.
And finally, do you think that there is a bias or stereotype towards immigrants?
I think so. Yes, absolutely. People sometimes assume things. In my case, I'm 46 years old. I'm adult. I think, I really look Latino from El Salvador. For sure, brown or moreno, as we said in El Salvador. I'm not white, blue eyes. And therefore, sometimes I go to places and then I can see the difference between, being a different color. One day, for example, I was going to get a surgery on my knee, and I went to this appointment with these doctors in a place where you don't see too many Latinos. And then when I arrived to the office, I told the front desk person I told her my name and I said I have an appointment. And the person, without even listening to me, she said, "Go sit down." And then I said, "Look, I have an appointment." "Yes, sit down. Somebody will come to talk to you." I obeyed. So I went, sit down, and I waited for about 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, I stand up and I went to the front desk person and I say, "Listen, my appointment was at this, let's say 1:30, and it's already 1:45. I have been waiting for 15 minutes. You said somebody was coming." And she said, "Just wait." Okay, I continue waiting for another like 5-10 minutes. Then somebody arrived, and then the person from the front desk talked to this person, and the person said, "Jose, can you come over?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I'm gonna be your interpreter for this appointment." This is 25-30 minutes later from my appointment time. And I say, "I don't need interpreter. I do speak English. I haven't requested an interpreter. I told you when I arrived that my appointment was at a specific time. I told you my appointment was at that specific time in English. So what made you think that I need an interpreter?" "Oh, Another thing, why you didn't ask me? And then, we got in the back and forth, and I said, I don't need interpreter. And interpreter said, like, it looks like you don't need interpreter, so I can leave. But here we are. The person didn't even ask me whether I speak English. I will imagine that because I look like adult. I am adult and I look Hispanic. And then I work with attorneys. And when we go to places, the majority of the of offices we get think that I am the client and not the person that work with the attorney. How you look like have a big impact when you go to places. I have a coworker. He's an attorney, and I work with a white attorney and with a Latino attorney. And one day we were going to court, the three of us, and to the white attorney they said, are you an attorney? Yes, you can come this door. You guys go to the other one. And my friend who's Latino and also an attorney, he said, like, listen, you're not respecting me. I am also an attorney, but just because I look brown, you don't believe I am an attorney. You think I am also a client. And that's another example that sometimes society go by what they have learned on, or sometimes they go by color. And this is just basic example, but sometimes the stereotyping can impact people's life in an even harder way. So I think also another belief is that, oh, if you are immigrants, you are undocumented. And you know what? No, it's not true. There are people that look Latino, there are people that look black, there are people that look Asians, and they are United States citizens as everyone else. But in the United States, sometimes many people assume that if you are white, blue eyes, you are U.S. citizens. If you're not, then you are from somewhere else. So I think this is something that for sure is happening every day and impacting millions of people's life. So yes, it is unfortunate, but we need to work on it.
Oh yes, there is a bias, and I will say racism, because one thing is stereotypes about people or ignore how to approach to an immigrant, but other is to block them from even getting something that is their right. I can mention many examples, from don't let them rent an apartment or deny them to have a doctor's appointment. We can talk about getting licenses. More than 15 states allowed undocumented people to get license. And Massachusetts was one of the last ones to allow them. So I would say yes, all immigrants have to face it.
I think yes, I felt it. But number one, I was not the only one. Number two, in a country full of immigrants from all over the world, feeling down or making too much of these prejudice was ridiculous, I felt. So I put my heavy coat of indifference and my tough skin to confront bias, stereotypes, name calling, even within the members of the family of my then wife from Vermont. I was very certain of my condition, of my potential, of who I was. And so those incidents where I felt put down or talked upon, or feeling that I was even insulted, didn't make me feel less valuable. On the contrary, it put me on the offensive. I became a volunteer with organizations that confront racism, classism. I was politically minded in El Salvador, and those experiences prepare me to face all of that discrimination, racism, bias, prejudice. Plus, I was working in the field of education, where all those things are not only present, but they are studied with strategies to confront them and defeat them. So I think, although they were present, they didn't break me because I knew how to tackle them, and I did.
Thank you for listening.